Elias Ward stepped through the tall iron gates of the Music Academy with slow, careful steps, as if he was afraid the ground might reject him. It was his first day at the most respected performing arts school in the state, a school where almost every student came from rich families or professional music backgrounds. Elias was neither. He came from a quiet small town where the streets were dusty, the grocery store closed early, and the only piano he had ever touched was a second-hand upright piano his mother bought from an old church years ago. The paint on it was cracked, some keys were chipped, and one pedal squeaked every time he used it. But to Elias, it was the most beautiful thing in his life. The Academy campus felt too big for him, too shiny, too full of people who seemed to belong there much more than he did. Students walked past him in expensive clothes, carrying polished instrument cases, talking excitedly about tutors, competitions, and summer music camps. Elias didn't know any of those words. He only knew how to play from the heart, something his mother taught him before she passed away when he was 12. She played every night after dinner, soft music that filled their small home with warmth. Elias used to sit beside her, watching her hands move across the keys with love and calmness. When she died, the piano became his only connection to her. He played the same songs she used to play, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, sometimes both. When Elias entered the main building, he felt dozens of curious eyes watching him. His clothes were simple, his backpack old, and his shoes dusted from the bus ride. Some students whispered to each other, wondering who he was and how he got accepted. A group of boys leaning against the wall noticed him right away. One of them laughed quietly and said, "Looks like someone wandered into the wrong school." Elias heard it but kept walking. He had learned a long time ago that ignoring people was easier than answering them. He reached the auditorium, where all new students were supposed to gather. The room was huge with tall lights, shiny wooden floors, and a grand piano on the stage that looked far more expensive than anything Elias had ever touched. Students found seats in groups, chatting with friends or scrolling on their phones. Elias sat alone near the middle row, his hands shaking quietly in his lap. Then the school director, Mr. Harlan, walked onto the stage. He was a tall, older man with sharp eyes and a strict face. He introduced himself and talked about discipline, excellence, and the expectations of the academy. His voice echoed through the hall with authority. Eventually, he said students would come up one by one to play a short piece, so teachers could understand their level. Elias felt his heart drop. He had not expected to play on the first day. His chest tightened, and his palms became sweaty. The grand piano on the stage looked like a monster waiting for him to make a mistake. One by one, the students went up. They played flawless pieces, fast scales, complex melodies, and impressive techniques that made the audience nod approvingly. Some students even received quiet compliments from the teachers. Every performance made Elias sink deeper into his seat. Maybe he really didn't belong here. Maybe coming to this academy was a mistake. When his name was finally called, Elias froze for a second. He heard a few students whisper, some giggle softly as he stood up. He walked toward the stage, feeling every step heavy, like he was being judged with each movement. When he sat down at the piano bench, the room grew silent, but not in a supportive way. Many students expected him to fail. Even Mr. Harlan looked at him with mild disappointment, as if already predicting the outcome. Elias placed his fingers on the keys. They trembled. He didn't know what to play. He hadn't practiced anything fancy or difficult. So he played something simple, the same warm-up exercise his mother taught him when he was a child. A slow, gentle sequence of notes that sounded almost too easy for a school like this. The moment the first notes came out, a few students snickered. One student whispered, "That's baby music." Elias kept his eyes on the keys, pretending he didn't hear it. He kept playing, but his confidence shrank with every quiet laugh around the room. When he finished, the hall was awkwardly quiet. Not impressed, just confused. Mr. Harlan wrote something on his clipboard and said a plain "thank you." No smile. No encouragement. Elias walked back to his seat with his head lowered. Students weren't laughing loudly, but their smirks were louder than words. They thought they knew everything about him from those few seconds of simple playing. They didn't know about the nights he practiced alone. They didn't know about the music he carried in his heart. They didn't know that the boy they mocked would one day silence the entire room. Elias came to school the next morning, hoping the whispers from yesterday would fade, but they had only grown louder. Students in the hallway looked at him with the same smirking curiosity they gave to a stray cat that wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Some didn't bother hiding their expressions. Others openly whispered as he walked by, "That's the kid who played the nursery piece." Someone said, "He must have slipped into the academy by accident." Another joked. Elias kept his face calm. But inside his chest, something twisted. He told himself he came to learn, not to compete with students who grew up surrounded by tutors, competitions, and conservatories. Still, their words hurt more than he wanted to admit. His first class of the day was music theory. Students sat with straight backs, their notebooks neat, their pencils sharpened, ready to impress. Elias quietly took a seat at the back. The teacher, Miss Rivera, entered with an energy different from the others. She had warm eyes, dark hair pulled into a bun, and a smile that seemed real. But even she paused when she saw Elias. Not in disgust. Not in judgment. In curiosity. During the roll call, when she reached his name, she looked up and said, "Ah, you're Elias Ward? Welcome." Her voice held no sarcasm. It confused him. Most teachers at the academy acted like kindness cost money. The class began, and Miss Rivera explained scales, keys, intervals, and harmonic functions. Most students nodded confidently, but to Elias these were unfamiliar terms. He didn't know the proper words for what he did at home on his old piano. He only knew how to feel the music, not explain it. When Miss Rivera asked a question, many students raised their hands. Their answers were polished, technical, and memorized. Then Miss Rivera said something that made him lift his head. "Music is not only knowledge," she said, "it is emotion. Emotion first, technique second." Some students shifted uncomfortably, as if she were challenging their perfect textbook answers. After class ended, students gathered their things. Elias stayed behind, trying to understand the notes he wrote. The paper was messy with scribbles and arrows. Before he could leave, Miss Rivera approached him. "You play from your heart, don't you?" she asked. Elias blinked. I don't know much theory." "I didn't ask about theory," she said softly. He didn't know what to say. No teacher had ever spoken to him like she understood him. Before he could answer, a loud laugh came from the door. The same group of boys from yesterday leaned there, arms crossed. "Miss, he played a children's warm-up yesterday," one said. "Emotion doesn't fix that." Another added, "He should join the beginners club. They meet on Saturdays. Maybe they can teach him where middle C is." Miss Rivera did not smile. "If any of you spent as much time practicing as you do gossiping, you would all be better musicians." The boys shut up instantly. She turned back to Elias. "I'd like to hear you play again. After school. Piano room 3. Is that all right?" Elias hesitated. The thought of playing in front of someone else scared him. But something in Miss Rivera's calm voice gave him enough courage to nod. When the school day ended, Elias walked to piano room 3 with slow steps. The hallways were quiet, except for faint echoes of students practicing in distant rooms. When he reached the door, he stood there for a moment, wondering if this was a mistake. What if he disappointed her? What if he embarrassed himself again? He pushed the door open. The room was small and warm. There was a single upright piano, much nicer than the one he had at home, but not as intimidating as the grand piano on stage. Miss Rivera sat on a stool nearby, reading sheet music. When she saw him, she closed the book and smiled gently. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Whenever you're ready." Elias sat at the piano. His hands shook a little, but he closed his eyes and took a breath. He didn't play a scale or a warm-up. This time, he played the melody he wrote the night his mother died, a quiet, sad piece that he had never shown anyone. It wasn't perfect. Some notes wavered and his timing wasn't flawless, but the emotion poured out of his fingers like water from a cracked jar. Miss Rivera didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her hands folded on her lap. When Elias finished, he kept his eyes down. He expected criticism, corrections, maybe disappointment. But when he looked up, Miss Rivera's eyes were shining. "Elias," she whispered, "who taught you to play like that?" He swallowed hard. "My mom." She nodded slowly, understanding more than words could explain. "Elias," she said gently, "you are not ordinary. You have something rare. Something most students here will never have." No one had ever said anything like that to him, for the first time since he arrived at the academy. Elias felt something new rising inside. Hope. Elias woke up the next morning with something he hadn't felt in a long time: energy. Not confidence, not courage, but something quiet and warm. Like a small flame he didn't want to lose. Miss Rivera's words replayed in his mind over and over. "You are not ordinary. You have something rare." No one had ever said that about him. At home, before his mother passed, she would smile when he played, but she never used big words. She didn't need to. Her smile was enough. But hearing a teacher, an academy teacher, say he was unique felt like music he had never heard before. Still, the academy hallways were the same as always: loud, busy, sharp. Students rushed past him, laughing, discussing practice schedules, and showing off their new sheet music. Elias walked quietly, blending into the background like a shadow. But today, he didn't feel crushed by the environment. Today, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a place for him here. His first class was ensemble practice. Students stood in groups with their assigned partners, preparing for the upcoming winter showcase. During roll call, when Elias's name came up, a few heads turned, and someone whispered, "Oh, that's the warm-up boy." Elias felt a pinch in his chest, but he kept his face still. Their words didn't hit as deeply as before. He had a secret now: someone believed in him. Someone who understood his music. After class, he walked to the cafeteria. He sat alone, as usual, eating slowly, observing the room. On the other side, the group of boys who mocked him sat together, laughing loudly. Today, they didn't come over to tease him. They didn't need to. Their smirks from across the room said enough. When lunch ended, Elias walked toward the practice rooms. He passed the grand hallway filled with old portraits of famous musicians who once studied at the academy. Something about those paintings made him stop. Their confident faces, perfectly combed hair, upright postures, they all looked powerful. "Do you think I could ever belong up there?" Elias whispered to himself. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but a voice behind him answered, "Why not?" Elias turned around. Miss Rivera stood there, holding a stack of sheet music. I don't know," Elias said. "They look perfect, strong, talented." "So does every student," she said, "until life humbles them. True musicians are not born from perfection. Elias, they are born from struggle." He didn't know why, but her words made his throat tighten. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded toward the practice room hallway. "Come, I want to show you something." Elias followed her into a small room at the end of the hall. It wasn't like the others. This room had shelves filled with old music scores, photographs, and CDs. A quiet lamp lit the corner, giving the room a warm, nostalgic glow. "This," she said, pointing to an old CD player, "was my first teacher's recording. He was not the best technically, but when he played, people cried." Elias listened carefully as she pressed play. A soft, imperfect melody filled the room, notes slightly uneven, timing not flawless but full of emotion so deep that Elias felt his chest tighten. It wasn't polished. It wasn't studio-level perfect. It was real. Miss Rivera watched his reaction. She didn't speak until the last note faded. "Do you understand now?" she asked. Elias nodded slowly. "It feels alive." "Yes," she said. "Perfect music impresses the mind. Imperfect music touches the soul. And you, Elias, you have that soul." The words struck him harder this time, not because they were loud, but because they filled a part of him that had been empty for years. Miss Rivera walked to the piano in the corner. "Sit," she said. Elias sat. "Play me something raw," she said. "Not what you think you should play. Not something to impress anyone. Play something that hurts." He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he closed his eyes and searched inside his memories. He found a moment, the night he and his mother sat together on the floor, listening to rain on the roof while she told him stories about being brave. He began to play. The melody that came out wasn't smooth or controlled. It trembled. It cracked. It rose and fell in unexpected ways. But it was full of emotion, fear, loneliness, and the soft love he still felt for his mother. Miss Rivera said nothing. She simply listened with the same intense focus she had the day before. When he finished, she didn't clap. Instead, she said, "Elias, I want to mentor you. But only if you are willing to work harder than you ever have." His eyes widened. "Me? Yes," she said. "You have a gift. But gifts mean nothing without discipline." Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll work. I promise." She smiled softly. "Then we begin today." For the first time since he arrived at the academy, Elias walked out of a room with his head a little higher. People still whispered. Students still smirked. But it didn't matter anymore, because now he wasn't alone. And somewhere inside him, a quiet fire finally began to burn. The next few days moved differently for Elias. He still woke early, still rode the same crowded bus, still walked through the academy's tall glass doors with quiet steps. But his mind was no longer empty. Every morning, he carried the memory of Miss Rivera's words like a secret shield around his heart. It didn't stop people from whispering, but it stopped him from breaking when they did. Every afternoon, as the academy emptied, he slipped into Piano Room 3, where Miss Rivera waited like a calm lighthouse, guiding him through rough waters. Her lessons were unlike anything he had ever imagined. She didn't force him to memorize scales or lecture him about posture. Instead, she listened. She watched. She corrected only when he was ready. "Feel the note before you touch it," she said one evening as he tried to play with trembling fingers. "You're not chasing perfection. You're chasing truth." Elias didn't fully understand at first, but little by little, the meaning became clearer. Music was not about showing off, or proving people wrong, or impressing the teachers who overlooked him. It was about telling the truth no one else could say. Still, outside the quiet safety of Piano Room 3, the academy felt colder each day. One morning during ensemble class, the group of boys who mocked him gathered around him again. Their leader, Mason, smirked and said, "So warm up, boy. I heard you're spending a lot of time with Miss Rivera. She feeling sorry for you or something?" Elias stared down at the ground. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want to argue. He just wanted to learn. But Mason wasn't finished. "You really think you're getting a solo for the winter showcase?" Mason laughed loudly, drawing attention from nearby students. "Bro, you couldn't even play Twinkle Twinkle without shaking." Elias flinched, but before he could walk away, Mason added quietly, "Guys like you never make it here. You're just a filler student. A mistake on the acceptance list." There it was, that old heavy feeling Elias knew too well. The feeling of not belonging. The feeling of being too small for the world around him. But this time, the pain didn't crush him. It only pushed him silently back toward the one place he felt safe, piano room 3. When he walked in that afternoon, Miss Rivera immediately noticed something was wrong. His shoulders were tense. His eyes looked distant. "Who hurt you today?" she asked gently. Elias didn't name anyone. He didn't want to seem weak. He just said, "Everyone here is so much better. They've been trained since they were kids. I just play. I don't know the rules." Miss Rivera walked to the piano and placed her hand softly on the keys. "Do you know what these keys see every year?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "Hundreds of students who know every rule, every scale, every technique. They play perfectly, but they say nothing. Their music has no story. They play to impress, not to speak." She sat beside him. "Elias, rules create musicians. Pain creates artists. And you," her voice softened, "you have pain. You have story. That is something they can never manufacture." His eyes stung, but he blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. Miss Rivera continued, "You asked if you belong here. I'll answer simply. You belong anywhere your heart chooses to play." She pushed a sheet of blank music paper toward him. "This is where your winter showcase piece will begin," she said. Elias stared at the empty page. His breath caught. "But I don't know how to write music," he whispered. "That's why we start with silence," she said. "Silence is the space where truth grows." For the next hour, she guided him through small steps, simple chords, fragments of melodies he remembered from his mother, notes he felt rather than analyzed. Slowly, something began forming. Not a complete piece. Not even a full melody, just a start, but to Elias, that small start felt like a mountain he had finally learned to climb. A few days later, the Academy announced the official sign-up for the Winter Showcase auditions. Students rushed to add their names to the list. Mason and his group wrote their names proudly at the top. Elias stood in the back of the crowd, the sign-up sheet trembling slightly in his hands. He hesitated. Every nerve in his body screamed that this was a bad idea, that he wasn't ready, that he would embarrass himself again, that he would prove everyone right. But then he felt it, that quiet flame inside him that Miss Rivera had helped ignite. Without letting himself think, he wrote his name. When Mason saw it, he burst into laughter. "You? Auditioning? Oh, this is going to be hilarious. I'm bringing popcorn." Students around them snickered, but Elias didn't look at them. He looked at his name on the paper. For once in his life, the trembling inside him didn't make him weaker, it made him stronger. That night, as he walked out of the academy, the world looked different. The sky felt wider. The air felt sharper, because for the first time, Elias wasn't playing to survive. He was playing to be heard. Audition day arrived faster than Elias expected. The morning felt colder, sharper, as if the whole world wanted to test him. He woke before sunrise, unable to sleep, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. He stared at them for a long moment, wondering how these same, shaky fingers were supposed to create music strong enough to silence a room full of talented students. But he remembered Miss Rivera's voice telling him, "Your pain is your power." He breathed slowly until the shaking settled a little. The academy buzzed louder than usual that morning. Students rushed around the hallways, wearing excitement on their faces like bright costumes. Everyone talked about their pieces, their compositions, their chances of winning a spot in the Winter Showcase. Elias blended into the background, unnoticed by most, except for the occasional smirk or whisper from Mason's group. Mason walked past him, grinning. "Warm up, boy, ready to embarrass yourself again?" Elias didn't answer. Not because he was scared, but because answering Mason would mean giving him power. He kept walking. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was thick. Teachers sat in the front row with clipboards. Students filled the seats, waiting to hear each other perform. The grand piano on stage shone under the hot lights. It looked like a throne made of polished wood and impossible expectations. Elias stared at it with a sinking feeling. His stomach twisted. His throat felt tight. Miss Rivera appeared beside him silently. "Breathe," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. "What if I fail?" "You will fail only if you play for them," she said. "But if you play for yourself, you cannot fail." He nodded, though his heart still raced like a trapped bird. One by one, students were called to the stage. They played flawless classical pieces with quick fingers and perfect posture. Some sounded almost mechanical, like they had practiced the same notes so many times they forgot to feel the music. Mason took the stage halfway through. He sat with confidence, smirking at the audience before playing a fast, technically impressive piece that made students cheer. His fingers moved like lightning. When he finished, he stood up proudly as he received nods of approval from most teachers. Then the assistant director called out, "Next, Elias Ward." The room fell strangely quiet. Some students whispered. Others smiled in amusement. A few leaned forward, prepared to witness a failure. Elias walked toward the stage. Each step felt like carrying a mountain. His heartbeat thumped in his ears. When he stood beside the piano, he noticed his reflection in the glossy surface, small, nervous. Out of place. He sat down. The bench felt cold. The keys looked impossible. He placed his hands on them, but his fingers refused to move. His breath quickened. The audience grew impatient. He could feel their eyes stabbing into him like needles. He forgot how to play. Someone whispered loudly enough for half the hall to hear. Mason laughed softly. Elias closed his eyes. He tried to hear his heartbeat. Tried to hear anything that could guide him. And then a memory rose inside him, his mother's face, sitting beside him on the floor, telling him stories of bravery while the rain tapped on the windows. Her soft voice echoed in his mind. "Play what you feel, not what they expect." His heart steadied. He took a slow breath, and then he began. The first few notes were quiet, trembling like a shy child stepping onto a stage for the first time. The hall remained restless. A few students exchanged glances, unimpressed. But Elias didn't hear them anymore. The moment his fingers fully connected with the keys, something inside him opened, something raw, deep, and unfiltered. The melody grew stronger. Then stronger. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It didn't follow any famous composer's rules. But it carried emotion so heavy that even the critics in the room felt something shift. His music wasn't about showing skill. It was about telling a story, his story, a story of loneliness, of loss, of midnight tears, of a mother's love, of courage he didn't know he had. The room slowly fell silent. Even the restless students stopped whispering. The teachers leaned forward. Miss Rivera stood at the side of the hall, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Halfway through the piece, Elias's fingers stopped shaking. He played with steady determination, pouring every part of himself into the piano. The music rose, then softened, then rose again, like a heart learning to beat after years of silence. When he played the final note, it didn't crash or shout. It whispered. A soft, delicate ending that felt like saying goodbye to someone you love. The note lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. And then the room stayed completely still. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one moved. Elias didn't dare look up. He kept his head lowered, expecting criticism, maybe confusion, maybe a polite clap. Then he heard something he would never forget. A single clap. Miss Rivera. Then another clap from the teacher. Then another, until the entire hall erupted in applause. Not loud, not wild. But real. Honest. Elias looked up with wide, disbelieving eyes. For the first time, he saw respect in the faces around him. Even Mason's smirk had vanished. replaced by something close to shock. Elias didn't win the room with perfection. He won it with truth. Elias walked off the stage with shaky legs, unsure if what had just happened was real. The applause still echoed softly in his ears. Not the mocking laughter he expected. Not the whispers of doubt. But applause steady, honest, surprising even to him. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, trying to understand how a boy who once hid in the shadows had just made an entire auditorium fall silent. Miss Rivera met him backstage, her eyes bright with pride. She didn't hug him or say anything too dramatic. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You spoke today, Elias," and they finally listened. Those words warmed the coldest corners of his heart, but the world outside the stage was not completely changed. During lunch, the usual groups gathered in their corners. Elias sat alone at his usual table, eating quietly. He didn't expect anyone to join him. He didn't need them to. For the first time, he was comfortable being alone. But he noticed something different. Some students glanced at him with curiosity instead of mockery. A few whispered, but not in the same cruel tone as before. One girl even offered a small smile when their eyes met. It was strange, new, a little scary. Mason, however, was not smiling. He stormed into the cafeteria with his group trailing behind him. His jaw was tight, his eyes unfriendly. He walked straight toward Elias's table, and the room grew still. Everyone watched, waiting for a scene. Elias sat calmly, refusing to look away. Mason leaned down, his voice sharp. "You think that little performance changed anything? You had one lucky moment. One. Don't let it go to your head." Elias didn't answer. Mason wanted a reaction. He wasn't getting one. That silence irritated him even more. He clicked his tongue and walked off, but not before muttering, "You're still nothing here." The words tried to pull Elias down, but the old weight they once carried was gone. Because now Elias had something Mason couldn't touch, a sense of worth that didn't come from anyone else's approval. That afternoon, Miss Rivera sent him a short message through the school portal. "Piano room 3, after school. We begin the second phase." Elias didn't know what that meant, but the excitement in his chest carried him through the rest of his classes. When he entered the room later, Miss Rivera was already seated beside the piano with a folder full of sheet music. But the sheets were blank. Seeing Elias's confused expression, she smiled. "Today we shape your story." He sat beside her. "My story?" "Yes, the piece you played today, it came from memory and pain. Now we give it form, structure. We are going to complete your winter showcase piece." Elias's breath caught. "You mean I'm actually performing?" Miss Rivera looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "Of course you are. After today, the judges have no doubt." It felt unreal. Elias wasn't used to hearing such certainty. He nodded slowly, accepting her confidence even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Miss Rivera asked him to play the piece again, this time slower, allowing her to listen to every detail. She wrote down notes, marked patterns, and even closed her eyes at moments, feeling the music instead of analyzing it. When he finished, she said gently, "This piece is sad, beautiful, but incomplete. It ends like a wound that hasn't healed." Elias lowered his gaze. "I don't know how to finish it." She touched his arm lightly. "Then we don't finish with sadness. We finish with growth." For the next hour, they worked together, experimenting with chords, shaping transitions, carving out a climax that carried both pain and strength. Every time Elias played, he felt the music pulling something new out of him: anger, longing, hope. Emotions he had buried long ago. Miss Rivera watched him closely. "Your strength isn't in playing fast or loud. It's in making people feel. And to make them feel the ending, you must believe in it yourself." That sentence stayed with him long after they finished the lesson. On his walk home that evening, The city lights blurred softly around him. His mind drifted to memories of his mother, her laughter, her gentle hands guiding his tiny fingers on the worn-out piano keys. He stopped walking for a moment and looked up at the sky. "Mom," he whispered, "I think I'm finally doing something right." The wind carried no answer, but Elias felt a warmth inside him, as if she were proud. The next day, the academy felt different again. Whispers spread through students like small sparks. "Did you hear Elias play? I didn't expect that from him. He had real emotion." None of it sounded mocking. Even teachers who barely noticed him before greeted him with nods of respect. But the biggest surprise came when the assistant director approached him after class. "Ward," he said, adjusting his glasses, "your audition was unexpected. The director wants to discuss something with you before the showcase." Elias froze. "The director? Me?" "Yes, come to his office tomorrow after school." Elias nodded nervously, his heart pounding as the assistant director walked away. Elias stood in the hallway, stunned. The director, the same man who barely looked at him on day one, wanted to speak to him. Something big was coming, something he was not prepared for. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. The next afternoon felt heavier than usual for Elias. His fingers twitched nervously as he stood in front of the director's office door. The hallway outside was silent, the kind of silence that made the heart beat louder. For a moment, Elias wondered if this was all a mistake. Maybe the assistant director mixed up the names. Maybe the director wanted to scold him for something. Maybe everything he felt proud of was just an illusion. He lifted his hand and knocked. "Come in," a deep voice said. Elias stepped inside. The director, Mr. Harlan, sat behind a large wooden desk. His sharp eyes were fixed on Elias the moment he entered. The walls around the room were lined with framed awards, photos of famous graduates, and certificates that showed decades of achievement. Elias felt small again, like the boy who first walked through the academy gates with fear in his chest. "Sit," Mr. Harlan said. Elias obeyed, his palms sweating. The director folded his hands. "Elias Ward, I've been reviewing the audition notes." Elias swallowed hard. "I must admit." Mr. Harlan paused, clearing his throat. "I expected something entirely different from you." For a moment, Elias wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Mr. Harlan continued. "Your warm-up on day one was unimpressive. You played with little confidence. I believed you might not last long here." Elias lowered his gaze. He already knew this, but hearing it aloud stung more than he thought it would. "But," the director said firmly, "your audition proved me wrong." Elias lifted his head, surprised. "That piece you played. It wasn't technically perfect, but it carried something rare." The director leaned back in his chair. Emotion, honesty, a voice. A slow warmth spread across Elias's chest. No one had ever used those words about his music before. Mr. Harlan placed a file on the desk. "We want you to perform in the winter showcase. Not as a filler, not as a beginner, as a featured performer." Elias's breath caught. His heart skipped. "Me?" "Yes, you." The director's expression softened just a little. "But understand this, it also means pressure, expectations. You will be in front of the entire academy, parents, guests, sponsors, and professional musicians." Elias nodded quickly. "I'll work hard, sir. I promise." The director watched him carefully, as if measuring the weight of his words. Then he nodded. "Very well. Miss Rivera will continue mentoring you. The faculty expect something extraordinary from you." Extraordinary. Elias never thought that word would be used about him. When he left the office, his legs felt strangely weak, but his spirit felt stronger than it had ever been. He wanted to run to piano room 3 immediately and tell Miss Rivera. But before he reached the hallway, someone blocked his way. Mason. His arms were crossed. his jaw tight, his eyes burning with anger. "So," Mason said slowly, "you think you're a star now?" Elias stepped back slightly. I don't think that." "But they do," Mason snapped. "The director actually called you in." "You? Over me?" Students passing by slowed down, sensing the tension. Mason stepped forward. "You stole something that wasn't yours. I worked for years to get a solo. Years. And you some nobody shows up and takes it?" Elias shook his head. "I didn't take anything. I just played." Mason shoved him backward. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to send a message. Elias stumbled a little, steadying himself on the wall. "You don't deserve it," Mason hissed. "Do you hear me? You don't belong in that spotlight." Elias wanted to disappear, but something inside him fought back, a small voice that had been growing stronger ever since he met Miss Rivera. He stood straighter. "I may not be perfect," Elias said quietly, "but I earned this. Not with money. Not with tutors. With my heart." Mason looked stunned for a moment. Then his face stood with frustration. He walked off, leaving a wave of whispers behind him. But Elias wasn't scared anymore. He went straight to piano room 3 and found Miss Rivera waiting for him. She smiled when she saw his expression. "You talked to the director," she said. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," she laughed softly. "They're brighter." He told her everything. The invitation, the expectations, even Mason's anger. Miss Rivera listened carefully, then nodded. "You are stepping into a bigger world now. Elias, not everyone will celebrate you. Some will envy you. Some will fear your talent. But none of that matters." She guided him to sit at the piano. "What matters is this," she said, placing his hands gently on the keys. "Your truth. Your voice. Your story. Play from that place, and no one can silence you." Elias took a deep breath. Then he began to play. The notes were stronger than before, shaped by everything he had faced: fear, courage, doubt, and hope. Each sound felt like a step toward becoming the musician he was meant to be. As the music filled the room, Miss Rivera closed her eyes and listened. Elias didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how the showcase would go. He didn't know if the audience would understand his heart. But he knew one thing clearly: he was no longer the boy they underestimated. He was becoming something else, someone they would never forget. The night of the winter showcase arrived like a storm. Bright lights, rushing footsteps, nervous energy spreading through the academy like electricity. The auditorium looked completely different from the day of the audition. Rows of polished seats filled with parents, teachers, alumni, guests from music foundations, and students dressed in their best clothes. The stage was decorated with silver curtains, soft spotlights, and a grand piano that glowed under the warm lights. Backstage, Elias stood quietly, holding his sheet music and shaking hands. But the trembling was different now. It wasn't fear pulling him backward. It was anticipation pulling him forward. He could hear the audience murmuring, programs rustling, the low buzz of excitement. Miss Rivera walked up beside him. She wore a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes shining with pride. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Elias took a breath. "I'm not sure." She smiled. "Good. If you were completely sure, you wouldn't feel your music." He nodded and she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens out there," she said, "remember this: your mother would be proud." Those words wrapped around him like warmth on a cold night. One by one, performers went on stage. Some played violins, others sang, others danced, each performance greeted with applause. Mason performed too, his technique flawless, his confidence undeniable. He left the stage to loud cheers, but his eyes found Elias backstage. There was no smile, only tension. Finally, the assistant director stepped onto the stage. For our final performance tonight, he announced, we present a piece composed and performed by one of our youngest students, Elias Ward. Backstage, Elias froze for half a second. Then the lights dimmed. Students and teachers turned their heads. Parents whispered, wondering who this boy was. Elias stepped onto the stage. The moment his foot touched the wooden floor, the auditorium became silent. Not mocking, not curious, silent in the way that meant they were ready to listen. He walked to the grand piano, feeling each breath, each heartbeat. He sat down on the bench, his hands resting on his lap for a moment. The keys seemed to shimmer under the light, inviting him, challenging him. He looked into the audience and saw Miss Rivera standing in the back, her hands clasped together, her smile calm and steady. That sight gave him the strength he needed. He placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, and began. The first notes were soft, like whispers drifting across a quiet room. The melody carried the memory of a lonely boy practicing on a worn-out piano in a small house. It carried the sound of rain tapping against the window the night he created this piece. It carried the breath of a mother who believed in him before anyone else did. As the song grew, the auditorium changed. People leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Others held their breath without realizing it. Elias played with every piece of himself, his sadness, his fear, his courage, and the hope that Miss Rivera helped him discover. The music climbed higher, stronger, until it reached the part they had rewritten together, the part of growth. His fingers danced across the keys. Not fast like Mason's, but steady, powerful, full of meaning. The room felt smaller, as if every sound wrapped around the hearts of the people listening. Then came the ending, a soft, delicate note, just like the final breath of a memory. He let it rain. He let it live. Then he lifted his hands. Silence. Not a harsh silence. Beautiful one. Then before he could even breathe, the auditorium erupted in applause. Not polite applause, explosive applause. Some people stood. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The director himself stood slowly, clapping with a proud, stunned expression. Miss Rivera's hands were trembling as she clapped, her eyes shining brightly. Elias remained seated for a moment, overwhelmed. He rose slowly and bowed, his heart racing in a way that felt almost unreal. When he walked off stage, Miss Rivera reached him first. She didn't speak. She simply pulled him into a gentle embrace.